for those who've just joined, I'm going to be talking about this tendency that we have to compare ourselves to others. And it'll be a familiar tendency, I'm sure. And the Buddha had quite a lot to say about that. He quite often pointed his monks, the disciples, to this tendency in the human mind to sort of view ourselves in one way as better or worse, or the same as, superior, inferior, or equal to. And I'm going to be exploring that, maybe like with a bit of the sort of core teaching of Buddhism, the DNA. I'll express that as well as I can of this tendency that we have to have a strongly attached to a separate sense of self, a sense of a separate self. And then I'll look at some of the manifestations of comparison. Yeah, so we'll be going into that. So we'll have a meditation, then we'll have a talk, and any questions after that. So why don't we get going now? That's good. So do you want to do the lights down a bit? So I'll ring bells. I'll ring 2 stages and invite you to do the first and the third stage of the mindfulness of breathing, if you know that practice. If you don't know that practice, it's just tuning into the flow, the ebb and flow of the breath. You can learn these practices. In the mornings, we have a class for going through the practices, but just tune into the ebb and flow of the breath. I'll lead us in, so you can do the first and the third stage if you know them. So we'll begin with just letting go of any accumulations from the day, the activities, whether it's been a smooth, easy ride through today or choppy, turbulent. And whenever we meditate or we turn with awareness to experience, there's a residue of the feeling of the day in the body. Allowing your awareness to filter into the body, into the feet and the hands. Giving the back of your body and your tops of your shoulders a little attention. And the front of the body. And noticing the breath coming and going. Allowing the belly to soften. And feeling the movements of the spine, this gentle uprightness, unforced, alert. Aware of any tension in the jaw or the face or the throat. And then allowing an awareness of the breath to emerge for a short period of mindfulness of breathing. and broadening to include sounds and the whole of the body and whatever is arising in the senses or the mind. Okay, so I'm going to be talking for a little while, so do be comfortable, and then we can have questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. If you have questions, you can jot them into the chat box. So I'm going to explore this area of this tendency that we have to compare ourselves to other people. It's a very natural and ordinary human experience. And I want to sort of try to put across the core, you put that in the context of the core teaching, or at least one rendition of a very core teaching of the Buddha. And then say a few more things, which hopefully that'll help us set sail. So the Buddha pointed to the sense of a separate self. It's a pre-verbal experience. We don't need to sort of say, I have a separate self. It just comes with the package of being alive and conscious. We have this sense of a separate self. It's there all the time. If you're walking down the pavement and somebody is in your way, well, there you are. You've said it, haven't you? You're in my way. There's a sense of self. Usually the sense of self is flared up a bit. There's a view there that you're in my way, and there might be some actions which follow from that. So quite often the core essence of what the Buddha was pointing to is how we have a sense of a separate self, and then we have views which form out around that sense of self. We have an identity, in other words. And very simply, we have those sort of some key identities, and they're quite simple comparisons in a way. I'm right, they're wrong, or I'm wrong, or I'm better, I'm superior, I'm inferior, or I'm good and bad. There's a this and that of identity. It's a sense of measuring ourselves in relation to what's out there, and it's quite an ordinary experience, and it's one of the first manifestations of a view about things. And again, that doesn't have to be actually verbalized. We can just go around with the way that we see the world is I'm right, I'm wrong. We don't have to necessarily be explicit. And then there's all sorts of other views that we can have that are a bit more developed, and that might be views about our lives, where we were born, our conditions that we grew up in, our political beliefs, our religious views, what we like, what we don't like, a whole host of other things which we could call our views about ourselves. And that sort of all comes under the category of a self-view. We have a sense of ourselves as this personality, this body, here we are. It barely needs to be said, but the Buddha said it, and the reason he said it we'll come on to. So we have this sense of self, we have views, and if our views are not, so if we have very helpful views, and those views we might be categorized as views that the Buddha encouraged, certainly views of Dharma views. Like, for example, when we're doing the metta practice, we're cultivating a view that is one of relatedness, one of openness, a view that views how we use our mind as important, for example. And that kind of view is going to condition a skillful response. It's going to condition empathy, goodwill, relatedness, concern, equanimity, or whatever. So even joy. So the view can lead to skillful states of mind, which can lead to skillful actions. And that, if that happens, that feeds back into our sense of ourselves. So there we have it. We have views, we have actions, we have a sense of self, which is pre-verbal. We have our views, which are maybe verbalized, maybe not. And then we have our states of mind, and then our actions that follow. If our views are not like that, if our views are different set of views, can give rise to unskillful actions. So, for example, if we're comparing ourselves negatively to others, we may end up with a state of envy, and that may become our predominant state of mind. And of course, then we act out of that. We live out of that state of mind, which again will tend to confirm and condition our sense of ourselves. It will become our identity. So that's a whole circle that happens. Or if we consider ourselves superior or better to others, it will give rise to conceit. And that has actions and consequences, which will again, and usually we're a mixture, aren't we? We sometimes when we think we're better, we kind of think we're worse. Or when we think we're worse, we're harboring a view that we're actually better. It's not, when you're in that territory of comparing yourself, very often you can flick between poles. So we have this sense of, and the Buddha said, well, we need to shine a whole light. We need to shine a light. The Buddha's teachings was all him trying to encourage us to wake up, trying to see into what is going on, and try to broaden our view away from the idea of a fixed personality, the idea that I exist in some way that is fixed and unchanging in relation to everything else. He said that view is the chief ignorance that we labor under, often without really knowing it. And a lot of our suffering at the most profound level certainly comes from that tendency. And we can do something about that. We can start to investigate experience. We can start to investigate it right now, at any time, with the Buddha's reflective suggestions about how to do that. Of course, the whole Buddhist path is really about how to inquire into that and how to create positive conditions that create a positive sense of self, a more flexible sense of self, and then how to look into that and really inquire, because what is really going on? How are things really? And there's much more, the Buddha said. So the Buddha said that everything that we think about our lives, everything that we think about our personality and who we are, well, it's valid. Obviously it's valid. It's not. We're trying to get rid of that, but we're trying to notice that is all conditioned, and that is all not to be clung to, and that this tendency that we have to really believe in a fixed and final sort of separate self, me, in other words, me or mine. That is what the Buddha was trying to help us to see through. So comparison. I mean, we all compare ourselves throughout life. It happens in the school playground. I'm sure you can think of examples of that. It's usually quite simple, isn't it? He's quicker than me. She's cleverer than me. For me, it was he's taller than me, and that carried on. So it carries on into secondary school. It gets a bit more awkward and more painful, doesn't it? It's painful to see a teenager who's a beautiful, lovely person, but they're in bits because they're comparing themselves to other people. You'd like to think it stopped when you're an adult, but it doesn't. It just rolls on. You can compare yourself in terms of wealth or class, education, race, even, unpleasant things that you can compare yourself on that basis better or worse, or in that way. So it just carries on. It's often generalized, so you can get dug into a generalized comparison. My life isn't going very well compared to them over there, they're having a good time, I'm not having a good time, my lot's hard and their lot's easy, or I'm the only one who knows anything here. You can get generalized views about yourself all through your adult life, and that's how we can be sort of habituated to approach the world. So let's say a word for comparisons before we say any more, because comparing things is just a function of the mind, and it's a perfectly useful thing to do. And if anybody says, well, the Buddha said you shouldn't never compare anything, just go to a supermarket, for example. Just go into a supermarket and ask them to choose. And when they pick one pear or one bag of pears over another, you can say, why? Why did you choose that? Well, those pears, they're squishy and brown, and those look pretty good, and so they're better and they're worse, right? It's clear. It's not a problem. It's a function that's extremely useful. With the whole sense of self, you could say, with the sense of self in a basic sense, we couldn't really survive without a sense of self. It's fundamental to existence in any useful, well, certainly in any human way, that we have a healthy sense of ourselves and a mature ego. Yeah. Equally, it's clear that we need to compare things sometimes, and that's useful. So I'm going to try to give an example from my own life, which is just showing how that can go slightly awry, that sense of comparing. I happen to think it's a view that I hold about myself that I am a good map reader. I was a very good Boy Scout. I learned, and so I can be on a hillside and look at all the sort of elements of the surrounding environment, and then look at the map and work out where we are, and then use a compass and plot the course. And I am pretty confident I am a good map reader. I may not be the best. I'm certainly not the best map reader, but often I find myself in a group and I think, do you know what? I'm probably the best map reader here. And that would be okay in a emergency. That would be quite a useful discrimination to make. Some people might disagree. We might have a bit of a dispute about that. But anyway, where it might get a bit unhelpful, and it sometimes does, if I'm the guy who always has to do the map reading because I'm the best map reader. And that can set up a tension, can't it? I'm the one who always has to be in charge of the map. And then, of course, it has happened, and this is, it has happened that I have gone the wrong way. And I have led people the wrong way. And then it's difficult because so the rest of the party probably don't mind that I've gone the wrong way. They say, well, okay, we'll just double back. You missed the style, no problem. But if I'm very identified with being the best map reader and the best in the group, and if I've somehow sort of think, oh, no, I really am the best map reader, I am, and I'm insisting on that point, I'm now having to deal with the fact that I've also gone the wrong way. And, I'm sort of offering to fall on my sword at this point. It's a big deal, and I get in a grump for a while, and then I relax out of it again. It's not a serious example, but it's starting to show how we can even identify around little things like I'm really good at reading maps, and I am really good. I know what's best. I know the best way. Even with things like judgments about what fruit is best, you do get that thing where you turn into the person who always knows what's best, or always knows what the best thing is, or where to get the best deal, or what's the most cool thing. And even using our comparison on a simple level to just judge what one thing is better over another can become a habit. And so I always know what the best stuff. I got the best stuff. I'm always in the know. I know about that. And in a way, that can sort of suck the joy out of life as well. Even with food, the best food you get is in company with friends, and when you're hungry, that's the best food. It's not because you're really good at choosing food. So that's so we can, even with those sort of homely things, we can start to notice how comparison can become an identity and can become something. We take it as saying something about us and what we really are. I notice it in meetings. When I'm having a meeting, there's quite a lot of opportunity in a meeting to compare yourself to other people. And it's a good chance to notice, am I approaching this meeting with a sense of being sort of superior to my colleagues, knowing more than them, and just sort of waiting for them to listen to what I've got to say as a result? Or am I approaching it with a sense of inferiority, not having anything to offer, being a bit ignored or something? Yeah. Or am I approaching it with a sense of insisting that everybody's the same and nobody's got anything, more to offer than anybody else? And that's another type of view. I'll come back to that equality because the Buddha didn't let us get away with saying it's just better or worse. He did say that we can cling and identify around the view that everything is equal as well. But going back to the meeting example, what I practice sometimes, and I do when I remember to do it, it's really useful, is that I just tune in to what's my feeling about myself as I approach this meeting. Is there a sense of competitiveness or being a bit better or a bit worse, and being right or being wrong? A bit of comparison that's sort of going in, that's sort of blocking my natural wish to just engage with whatever the meeting is about. Yeah. And I noticed that when you have that urge to speak, it kind of comes up, doesn't it? There's that urge. I'm going to say something. Sometimes I just check that. I just pause for a few seconds even and just notice, oh no, that's coming out of a sense of I just need to put my tuppence in now, because if you blurt out and you say something just because you're feeling a bit inferior, it usually doesn't land very well, and it's kind of you wish, why did I say that? Or sometimes there's doubt, isn't it? I notice, oh, should I say that? Should I offer that? Usually if there's doubt, I do offer it. That's my style. People will concur that I often offer my thoughts, maybe too much. But if I've checked out how I am, is that coming out of a sense of self which is, locked in this comparing, feeling inferior or superior? If I've checked that out, when I offer what I have to say, if somebody says, no, well, we've already thought about that and not sure that we need to do that or whatever, and that idea is sort of rejected, as it were, I'm much less liable to be worried by that. That's fine. Okay, let it go, whatever. And then there's those strong things you just want to say, you just have this urge to say, and they really always land well, don't they? I mean, if you have a genuine sense of wanting to contribute, it's not coming out of your sense of comparing. It's just coming out of your humanness and your wish to connect with others and get things done, or however you want to frame it. So yeah, meetings is a really good place to look at comparisons. Another place, so just a couple more things before we go for questions, but another good place is Dharma practice. Comparisons can come in. So when we start off meditating, and certainly this was my experience, we have what we call beginner's mind. And one way of looking at beginner's mind is that you're just not bothered about comparing how your neighbor's meditation practice is going. You're really into the practice. It's fascinating. Wow, everything that's said really is marvelous and just kind of, it seems endlessly fascinating. And there's no judging your experience. And when somebody says, whatever's there, just, open to that, you open to that, you just do that. And you think, wow, And then a bit later on, even in spiritual practice, or maybe particularly in spiritual practice, this tendency rearises to start comparing. So, those people you first went on retreat with, how they seem to be doing, they're getting a bit further than me. Or maybe there's a sense that I've really made a realization and I'm somehow better. So we can sit here comparing our meditation practices, having that sense of, am I not doing this right? And we might even compare our Buddhist group. I mean, that's quite common, isn't it? You think, I might be not a good meditator, but I'm in the best Buddhist group. I'm in the best Buddhist group, at least. Or you might think the opposite. I'm not sure what these guys have got to offer. They're all right, but I think I'll prefer that woman I saw on YouTube or whatever. So you can get into comparing Buddhist groups or any other spiritual groups or teachings. And of course, it's valid to make comparisons, and we all do. And and it has a useful range of comparisons. Even in spiritual life, you have to choose what you give your life to, what you give your attention to. But when that becomes the level of practice, that's very limited. When we get stuck with that, and the idea. So the Buddha also said, if you compare yourself as the same as or equal to others, that can be a trap, and that can be a trap in spiritual practice as well. Just the idea that all spiritual practices are the same, or they're equal to, or all teachers are the same, and no one's really got anything more to say than anybody else, or no one's better than anyone else. And we know deep down that message of equality has a very positive note to it. And, I was born with a disability, and I'm very glad my parents said that I'm the same as, no one's any better than you. That was the message I got. It was a very positive message. And when it relates to our very being, that intuition of equality is really, really important. It's not to be overlooked or looked down on. But if you have an insistence that all things are equal, if you insist that everybody is equal, and that all spiritual teachers, for example, are equal, you might sort of block off your natural sense of joy and wanting to connect with a person, a group. The heart is not rational. It doesn't work like that. Just because you love one group, it doesn't mean you think badly about another group. Just because so you can, that sense of equality can kill things off, kill off the joy and the connection and the love, if we use it as an identity or an insistence. Yeah. So the Buddha's teaching goes to the root. What his reflection was, and one of his reflections was, not better, not worse, not the same as. So with the pairs, going back to the pairs, there is nothing in those two pairs, the brown squidgy one and the firm one, that there's nothing in them which is inherently better or worse. That quality is a view that we bring. As I say, that has a useful aspect, particularly if you're choosing pairs. Yeah. But when you have fruit in a Cézanne painting, for example, you're not thinking, oh, it doesn't look like very good fruit, or I wouldn't like to eat that. Then you're looking at things in a different way. There's a different type of perception, which may be more aesthetic or to do with beauty. And then there's other types of perception which go maybe even deeper than that, where this mystery opens up, even about, maybe that's alluded to also in Cézanne's paintings, or Van Gogh chairs or something. You don't think, oh, that's a terrible chair, that's really badly put together. It's going deeper than that. The perception can go deeper than that. Even more so when we talk about ourselves, we can really have this sense of not better, not worse, not the same as. This tendency, because it's not an inherent quality of ourselves that we really are better or worse or the same as. It really isn't that. It's just like those pairs are not the same as each other either. We're not the same as other people. There's no quality that you call sameness. There's no thing that is there that really exists as a sort of independent thing. It's a view. So we have so we can really limit ourselves by this tendency to view ourselves as a finely separate self, which has these qualities of being better or worse, and a whole range of comparisons that we start believing in all of that. Yeah. The Buddha said that we have our personality, and this is a conditioned thing. It's a conditioned thing, just like our body is a conditioned thing, and that there's another way of approaching experience in a much more open way, a much more profound view, which opens a lot more possibilities and a lot more mystery. And that is the Buddha's teaching ultimately points to something that is beyond views, that isn't limited by attaching to a view. Yeah. before I get myself into anything of a metaphysical muddle any more than I have done, I'm going to open up for questions.
I'll ask people now.
So yeah, we're having some questions coming in if you want to type them in. And Max will say them to me and I'll repeat them.
Just waiting for something to come through. If you can, Satyadasa, just look to the camera a bit more.
Okay. Yep. We have this, we try to look at the camera, but it's looking at a camera doesn't always conduce to good states of mind.
So Phoebe has asked, what are some ways which we can work with feelings of comparison in our own lives?
So Phoebe asks, what are some ways we can work with feelings of comparison in our own lives? Yeah, thanks for that question. Well, when we're, if we have a meditation practice, we can use these inquiries about comparison during our meditation practice. So and hopefully that will have an effect on our lives as well. Our lives, our meditation practice is to do with our lives, right? So for example, with the metta practice, one of the things I've noticed is for example, in the second stage of the metta bhavana, you bring a friend to mind. And you're doing your metta practice, however you do it. But sometimes I've asked myself, am I considering myself equal to my friend? Is there an insistence of like we're both the same? And that can unlock the extent to which we're not the same. Or it can unlock a range of positive feelings about my friend that were maybe trapped in a sense of myself comparing myself to him or her. That subtle competitiveness that you get with friends is maybe quite normal and quite fine, but it can often just like we can have a view about our friend as being maybe a bit better or a bit luckier or a bit, or maybe we're a bit condescending even towards our friend. We think we're a bit better than them, and like those can be very subtly held. It's not these are real thoughts that go through your mind. They're kind of just views that you have that you may or may not verbalize. So just that saying, how am I approaching my friend? Am I making us better, worse, or the same as in the metta practice? That might really open something up, particularly, of course, that can happen in the other stages, but it's really good to notice that in that stage. As I said, there's also meetings. So, I find meetings good practice. We all have to have meetings, or at least most of us have to have meetings at some point. And that can bring out that, you've got a lot of people there. So any reactions or habits that you have in terms of how you feel about yourself, or, that's a good opportunity. And in the other thing might be to work with a sense of spaciousness in meditation. So even in that little sit that we did, even just in 10-minute sit, you start to create a space where you can notice or unhook from views, unhook from ways of seeing. They're not apparent when we start meditating. We're often they're right there with us, some idea or some perspective that we have. And as we just bring our attention to these simple mindfulness of the body or the feeling or the breath, we loosen. We just loosen, and we sort of physically loosen, and we the heart opens maybe a little bit, and we get a sense of space, a sense of spaciousness in the body, or in just in our minds. A sense of and we can notice that we're a bit freer. Then we're freer from self-views. Self-views are not afflicting us; they really afflict us. Self-views. So those are a few ideas. I'm sure there's a lot of ways to practice with comparison. The key thing is to know it. That's the key thing, that the Buddhists know that that's happening. You need mindfulness. We need awareness. We need to cultivate those conditions which help us to be aware, and cultivate the kind of mind which wants to be aware and rejoices in that. That's the Buddhist path. Any other questions?
Yeah, that's we've got quite a few. Jack says he feels pity or discomfort for him in the past, and do you have any advice on comparing ourselves to our past self?
Oh, so Jack was asking about this. He has a sense of pity for himself in the past. We often have things in the past we regret, don't we? And is there any advice for comparing ourselves to a version of how we were in the past? That's really interesting, isn't it? I think that's really common, actually, that happens. We might have had a time when we were really miserable in the past. And the sense of pity is actually really not a comparison. The sense that sounds at least potentially positive. It would depend what you mean by pity. But having a sense of compassion for ourselves in the past is not a comparison that blocks life. That is a positive comparison. There doesn't seem to be anything wrong with that. But if we're locked into an idea that we had a miserable past, my teacher Ratnagosha, who ordained me, he said that he was pretty clear that he had a miserable childhood. He grew up in rural Ireland. He was very poor. But after a while of telling his life story to other people, he changed his mind, actually. He realized he was quite happy. Sometimes just writing about the past can release us from the past in a subtle way. There's lots of ways to be creative in the way that we view ourselves in the past. We might think that we're really happy. I was really happy 10 years ago. I had such a great time, and now I'm miserable. That's actually a little bit harder, the sense that life has reached its summit when you were, 25 or something. And that's a view that actually is quite common, that it happened a while ago. Now it's just misery grading into disease and death. That's cheery, isn't it? But no, you see, that is also a tendency to compare, and really we just we need to engage with our lives, don't we? We need to find the resources to really engage with what's happening in our lives now. And that would be a negative comparison or unhelpful comparison.
So Uta has said, what's the right view? If you're not better or worse or equal to others, they're the wrong view. What's the right view? How should we approach others?
Oh, right. So Uta, did you say?
Uta, yeah.
Uta says, really good question. What if it's the wrong view that we're better, worse, or the same as? What's the right view? So as soon as I commit myself to saying what a right view is, I'm going to get into a mess. But it's really a reflection, that it's a reflective practice that the Buddha was talking about. It's not necessarily about replacing those wrong views with right views. There is a right view, and the right view would be something along the lines of any way that we approach the self with a sense of me, myself, and mine causes suffering. Any way that we view the self and cling to that, and by clinging we mean like a sense of either pushing things away in order to firm up our identity as not that, or clinging to stuff greedily, increasing the sense of mine, any way that we do that causes suffering. Those are sort of Dharma perspectives. And I forgot what I was going to say. The question was, what is the right view? Right view is ultimately not a view at all, actually. The Buddha said he was of no view. But these right views are views that help. The right view said, the Buddha said that any view which leads to the cessation of suffering, and you can observe this in yourself. You go, what views really help you? What really loosens you up? What actually helps you do the things that you want to do in your life and have purpose and connection and meaning? Those are right views, and ultimately the right view. So that the subtle thing about Buddhist teaching, he said that if you cling to any view about the self, even if you cling to the view that there's no self, that can be a cause of suffering too, because you might take that by the wrong end and insist that there's no such thing as personality, or I don't exist, or something. These are just reflections, and they're to be used simply as reflections. And by reflections, it can be a thought, or it could be just holding it in your heart when you really look with this kind awareness. Is there this better or worse? And does that lead to a sense of release? Yeah. Thank you for that question, Uta.
Yeah, great. So
just take one or two more, maybe, and then we'll wind up.
Sure. So Anna's asking, is thinking of things as better or worse or equal just a state of mind? And then should she approach everything with an open mind and only use her judgments when it becomes clear they'd be useful? So should she only use her judgment? Should she only be judgmental when she thinks they'll be useful? Should she try to be unjudgmental?
Okay, so who was that? Is that?
That's Anna.
Emma says, thanks for this, Emma. Emma says, should I approach things with an open mind and only use my judgment when it's appropriate?
Yeah.
Or useful? I guess yes. It's not easy to do, is it? The main thing is to notice that, we can do this within the context of daily life in a very obvious way. When we meet someone, what does it feel like? If we're mindful, if we've built a sense of mindfulness, we can just notice what's happening within us at any moment, even in the heat of a difficult state of mind. We can start to bring awareness in. Should I approach it with an open mind? Well, the more open-minded we are, and what would we mean by open-minded? I guess would be open-hearted, open-minded. That could point to a whole range of positive qualities that we would bring to concern. If we're in a sense of relatedness with others, there is the sense of self. There is the sense of self and other, but it's a bit freer, isn't it? It's not so collapsed in on us. So that might be what I sort of indicate by open-minded. And then, of course, we notice. So those judgments will be coming in all the time, and you'll know if they're appropriate to make. I mean, in a way, we don't need to worry too much about making appropriate comparisons, because that just happens. That's just part of human mind, that it can discriminate, and that can be very useful. It's just all the time. But when we're caught up by that, and maybe it's just tension in the body, you'll notice, or if there's unskillful things arising in the mind, envy, blame, resentment, all those things, you'll know that there's some kind of comparison going on. One more question?
Sure, yeah.
Thank you for that. Emma?
So Stephen has said, is comparison just subjective opinion?
So Stephen says, is comparison just subjective opinion?
Yeah. It's not real, and everyone's sense of comparison is different. Therefore not real.
and everyone's sense of comparison is different and therefore not real. Yeah. What's the first bit of that again?
The first bit is comparing people just subjective opinion?
Is comparing people just subjective opinion?
I guess, or is it like, is there actual difference?
Yeah, I don't. You know, I suppose you would say that it's a relative thing. It's a relative thing. You know, I love guitar music. I love Mark Knopfler. He's a better guitar player than me. And if anybody says he's not a better guitar player than me, because that's just a subjective judgment, you want to come around and listen to my guitar playing, and then we'll put Mark Knopfler on. And, you know, maybe there's something in that sense that there isn't, you know, like an ultimate sort of judgment that can be brought to bear. That certainly would be the Buddhist position, that really that reality isn't in the field of comparison, or how things really are is not that they're compared to each other. But in a relative sense, I think we can sort of, you know, people are going to argue whether Eric Clapton's better than Mark Knopfler and the Beatles, and then you get into that whole slightly boring debate, or whatever. But I think there's a relative validity in that. But that's my view. That it's perfectly okay. I love Mark Knopfler. I like listening to it, you know, and it's fine. I'm not going to argue about that too much. But yeah, probably there's always a relative. It's always relative, and it's that kind of mind. Mind works quite well, functions quite happily, but there's more. There's more than that. And if we're only concerned with that level, subjective and objective don't work quite so well within the Buddhist schemata of thinking about things. But we shouldn't denigrate it, you know, ourselves, our personality, our sense of right and wrong and good and bad. We need to see through it, you know, and that was the Buddha's main message. Start to look to the root, to the sense of self, and what the sense of self is building up, what it's doing. And that's his encouragement. So thank you very much for your questions. Apologies if we didn't get to all of them. That's great. So we'll start to wind up, but I want to make a couple of announcements before, and then we'll end with the transference of merits. First of all, Max is going to put our link to a home retreat. So next week we've got, starting on Sunday night, running through to the following Sunday, is a home retreat. This is going to be our most extensive online offering so far. There's going to be meditations in the earlier morning, and in the mid-morning session, there'll be a teaching, a meditation session, and Zoom breakouts. I don't know how it's all going to work. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's all on YouTube. Anyway, I don't know. There'll be a link. There's yoga and evening classes, and that's a whole week where you can tune in for whatever you can tune in for. So that's starting on this Sunday, on the 17th. We'll also put our appeal for dana, which is what we call generosity. So if you are feeling inspired to be generous and donate some money, we would be very grateful. Thank you very much for that. And if you've already given, thank you. What else to say? Have I missed anything, Max?
No, first two things.
Okay, so thank you very much for tuning in this evening. I look forward to seeing all of you one day from wherever you are in the world. And hopefully one day we'll be able to gather again. But thank you very much. We're going to end with the transference of merit and self-surrender. I will lead this in call and response. Transference of merit and self-surrender. May the merit gained in my acting thus go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings. My personality throughout my existences. My possessions. And my merit in all three ways. I give up without regard to myself. For the benefit of all beings. just as the earth and other elements
just as the earth and other elements
are serviceable in many ways
are serviceable in many ways
to the infinite number of beings
to the infinite number of beings
inhabiting limitless space.
inhabiting limitless space.
So may I become
So may I become
that which maintains all beings,
that which maintains all beings,
situated throughout space,
situated throughout space,
so long as all have not attained
so long as all have not attained
to peace.
to peace.
Thank you very much, everyone. Go well. Enjoy the rest of your evening.